Right, and we are live now.
We're up and running.
Share the video first.
No, if you don't know, later on. So, good morning, everyone. Really great to be here. Thoroughly enjoyed our time of worship there. Some of the words and some of the backgrounds as well to the words. Gorgeous, gorgeous. It's interesting the way God does lead. Alison praying. As I was sitting there, and a small congregation, but I've met most of you just in the few minutes before the service and at the break and so on. Where I worship is a C of E, and it's about 150 or so there at the service that I normally go to, but they've actually got 4 services dealing with different persuasions, different worship styles and so on. And as I prepared this, obviously did a little bit of research, finding out about Todd and Ruth and so on. And did my preparation. But I was sitting there earlier and just praying, okay, it's a different environment, it's much more intimate, and so on, Lord, when it comes to sharing, and I had lots of ideas as well as I was standing there singing. So I was praying, Lord, just help me to know which bits I should say and shouldn't say, and so on. And then you prayed exactly the same. So I think God's leading in that. So that's terrific. So it is good to be with you. For those I haven't spoken to, I come up from Birmingham, or South Birmingham, where I've lived most of all of my adult life. My first job was in Birmingham, and that's where I've lived, in the middle, on the north side, on the south side, which is where we are now. So it's about 60 minutes to get here this morning. Little bit of background. I was born in Cheshire, one side of the Pennines, brought up in Yorkshire, the other side of the Pennines, so neither of those counties seem to have an affinity to me. I get blamed more and picked on for the Yorkshire bit. It seems to have stuck in the language and the accent slightly more than the Cheshire bit. Married to Jan. We've got 2 boys who are married with their own children, so 4 grandchildren. I was just saying, the youngest one is Chloe, so one of your names I can remember. She's gone into the back. I came across CAP, I don't know when, it's a long time ago now, but was really attracted to their vision. And I'll say more about them later, but it was basically the vision of helping people to help themselves, as apart from a charity which is hugely worthwhile, that was a giver charity. You were giving help that they were having to help themselves. And in that context, they were able to share the good news of Jesus with those people. And it wasn't, the help they got wasn't based on whether they responded to that good news, but many do. The help continues if they don't. So I'll say more about CAP later and what they stand for. I was led to this passage, John 15. I think you've been talking about some essentials of church and so on. And this passage is, to me, a real foundation as to what being a Christian is all about. And the little bit of a conundrum, the mystery that starts in this passage is the very beginning. And it talks about God the Father, it talks about Jesus Christ, right in the first verse, first line, and then later on it talks about this bonding, which is essentially the work of the Spirit that draws us into a relationship with Jesus, a relationship that it describes as the vine and the branches. And in Christ it actually comes about 93 times. Well, according to the version I checked it on, it said 93. 93 times, obviously in the New Testament. Old Testament's not as relevant. But one of my favourite references to that is in Romans. I haven't written that one down, so I'll look it up. Romans 8. And in verse 39, I think it is. No power in the sky above or on the earth below, indeed nothing in all creation, will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Jesus Christ the Lord. And that's what this idea of the vine and the branches growing and the vine being Jesus is all about. Because it's this conundrum of Jesus in me, but me in Christ, me in Jesus as well. The two, and how they go together. You may have heard the concept of the bucket lowered into the sea. Well, is the sea in the bucket, or is the bucket in the sea? Well, I'll leave you to puzzle that one out. Work that over your Sunday lunch. It's both. And that's what this passage is very much emphasising. We were talking a little bit about youth. And you were praying for the youth and perhaps an alpha. And I was talking to Sarah about that and her concept of youth. She's a bit nearer youth than I am. And I was thinking, youth probably don't know the name of Jesus. It might vaguely, they might use it as a swear word even at times. They might have some sort of concept, but really the identity of Jesus was somebody who lived 2,000 years ago as a carpenter, etc., etc. A little bit from Christmas. Oh, is that the one that was born of a virgin? Oh, yeah. Type of attitude, something like that. But they do know about God, because there's that concept, isn't there? I am surprised. Watch out for it. Watching television or films, the number of times there is somebody that's died, and it happens on the news with real live sort of interviews, and the person who's lost a dear one talks about, they're looking down on me. I know they're proud of me. I feel they are with me. Is very, very common. And it's that sense that there is something beyond. If you engage them in an intellectual conversation, they may struggle with that. But the natural instinct is, yes, there's something more. There's something beyond. That the idea of God is in their mind, but not so much of Jesus. So for me, I am an engineer by background, so things, work or don't work, right and wrong, and all those sort of things. I remember, again, talking to Sarah in IT, I did IT training as the first bit of my career. And when you were writing programs, if you didn't put a dot, just a full stop type dot, in the right place, the program didn't work. It's nothing like that now. Very, very pedantic. So I work on logic and so on. But when I think of God, I soon run out of logic. All omniscient, omnipresent, creator of heaven and earth. And already my brain is going to mush. You get these things on the professors and so on the telly, and they talk about the size of the universe and things like that. And they talk about black holes was on the other day. I'm lost. And actually I've been standing there and looking at this. And you think people will talk about evolution and so on, and that's fine. There's a place for evolution somewhere in the creation story. We won't get into that. I'll let Todd sort that one out, but it's not either or. But you look at this, and you see, and I'm wandering away a little bit, you see the leaves on these trees and how beautiful they are. And then you look over this side, and you see these little flowers, and then the grasses, and then you see this purpling heather or whatever it is. You look at those background to the songs, and a lot of them, there's mechanics for this. Scientists will explain the DNA and da-da-da-da-da-da. But what about the sheer beauty of a scene like that? Of a red sky? A lot of them, behind the words, they'll often use their sort of colourful sunrise or sunset. Where does that come from? That's not DNA. Where does that beauty come from, and so on? And so in creation, we begin to see this God, but only so much of it. And in Jesus, what happened? Well, God wanted to communicate to us. All of us struggled to get our heads around that idea of God because of the fallen world and fallen people that we are. That innate spiritual nature is no longer there. So Jesus came. And if you read the scriptures carefully, God was wrapped in human flesh. Now that restricted God. He walked this earth, but with restrictions, the restrictions of a human being called Jesus. But when I start to think about that, and I read about the life that Jesus lived, then I think, yeah, I can identify with that. I can understand that. A tired man, a man that had to eat and grow up, and so on. So I find that looking at Jesus is just that small image of what God is like, but it does tell me what God is like in character. Where he lives and so what sort of a house God has and so on, I don't know. But God's character is completely clear because it's the character that Jesus demonstrated whilst he was here on earth. In the passage we read, then it talks about branches, and someone in prayer, whether it was you, Todd, talked about the idea of grafting. And we've got at least one gardener I know that appreciates flowers and colours of leaves. There may be some others. But grafting is that idea that you take what they call the rootstock, which is the vine with the main trunk on it, and that's trimmed right back. So you might have a couple of major branches going off, but it wouldn't be huge. It wouldn't go very far. And into that, they sort of cut a bit of the flesh, the bark, if you'd call it. And then they get a branch that has been sharpened, so it's either a chisel or a point. They stick that into the vine and then bind it all up. And that's called grafting. What I didn't realise at first, but in finding out, I thought was tremendous. The quality and the type of fruit you get on the end of the branch is dependent on the branch, not the vine. The vine is common, and then you put a branch on it and you get the fruit that is typical of the branch. So what happens is, if you want to grow vines in England, we take a rootstock that's strong and so on, but then we get a branch that's from a climate that is similar as we can find in England. Who else has our climate? And that's the one you put onto the rootstock so that when it grows, the climate doesn't come as a shock to it. Yeah? And so it grows and flourishes. And I was just thinking about that and each one of us being a branch. If we are grafted into the vine, then it's Jesus and our relationship with him that gives us the sustenance. That's grafted in like blood. It draws up the sap. Where does the sap come from? It comes from Jesus. Where does the food for that sap, etc.? It comes from the roots that are Jesus. It says in Colossians, let your roots grow down into him. And that's done through the vine, goes in, draws up the nourishment. So that happens, but what's the context we're in? The context, as a branch, you are created for that context. Just in the same way, they choose branches to graft in, and the branches are appropriate for the climate of the country. And so for us, God has created us and grafted us into Jesus. And whatever context you are in, that is the right context for you. That's the context in which you can flourish. Because you've got the rootstock, you've got the power of the Spirit flowing in you through that sap, whatever illustration we use, and can help you grow as a branch, develop your fruit, and be fruitful. It's interesting when it talks about being fruitful. Most of the time it says much fruit in John 15. Not just fruit, but much fruit. There's another picture of that I'll give you shortly. So our responsibility in that grafting is first of all to be grafted. And maybe for you, or maybe for a friend of yours that you know, they've never actually made that decision to say, okay, I've recognised as a branch, I cannot survive on my own. I need grafting in where there's sustenance and purpose and meaning to life, and that's the vine of Jesus. So that's the first commitment we make, to join with Jesus and to draw on his nourishment. But then there's the pruning, and again that's another topic of immense discussion. What does it mean that he prunes us? And I heard somebody saying this morning about difficult times, and difficult times are part of God's pruning. And I was talking to Alison before the service started. The idea of why does God intervene in some situations and not in others? I do not know. Another one, Todd, saw that one. I really don't know. But what I do know, there's a verse in the Old Testament about a battle that the Israelites are going into. And it says, tomorrow, go into battle. Take your position, stand still, and see the victory of the Lord on your behalf. Now that, to me, sounds good. However, the second bit of the verse goes on to say that tomorrow, go out against them, and the Lord will be with you. Now does that mean both, that I'm going to get the victory and the Lord will be with me? Or is it that it's definitely the Lord with me and I may get... How do those two work together? And again, I don't know. But that promise that whatever situation you're in, it doesn't always work out the way we would like it to. We don't always see what we might describe as the victory in the situation. But the promise that we can say, because it's so written through the rest of Scriptures, is that the Lord is with us. And so that's the encouragement. Our context is the right context for us. And if it isn't, God nudges you and you move jobs or move role or whatever it might be. So you're in the context, listening to God, and He's with you. Even if it doesn't always work out the way you would like it to. But even when it doesn't, Luke 10, if you read the story of the widow that wanted, the person was hosting somebody, didn't have any bread, so they knocked on a neighbour's door, was bashing the door down, the neighbour said, I'm in bed, don't disturb me now, and so on. It's not a story about how God answers prayer, but it's a story about how God loves, that He provides in that context. Even so, whatever context you're in, you can be sure that God will hear, and it's more about that relationship with Him and being able to talk to Him than it is the provision in itself. So, the other one verse that I did want to turn to and particularly point out in this passage in John was, I won't find it in Romans, it's still there. It's in verse 9, I think it is. Yes. Well, when we're talking about this relationship, this abiding, the vine and the branches, He says, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. That idea of remaining again, staying attached to the vine. And it was that phrase, I have loved you as the Father has loved me. If you were thinking of an analogy, put my teeth in, about just trying to describe love, my love for you, our little Chloe that I mentioned earlier, she would always to say, I love you to the moon and back, which is quite a common one now. How to describe this love? And Jesus could have said, as a mother nurses and nourishes a child, or as a husband cherishes his wife, as a youth devotes themselves to their mobile phone, as a supporter does to his football team, as a rich person enjoys their lifestyle, or as a gardener loves their garden. You tend your garden, you look at it, that's nice. He didn't use any of those phrases. What he used is Jesus' experience of real love was how the Father loved him, and that was the ultimate. So he says, I will love you that way, beyond any of those expressions that you can work out, is the way Jesus wants to love us. So with respect to Cat, let me come to that and explain a little bit about that, especially as that was the reason for being here, besides sharing God's word. We come across CAP as an organisation that's been going now and established for a number of years, and as I mentioned at the beginning, its focus is on providing solutions for people, not giving them the solutions. So they look to people to help themselves. In order to do that, people give up. Yes, there's a financial aspect of running CAP, but incredible number of volunteers that give their time. And we've all got time we can give. Takes a bit of shuffling sometimes. But there's always things we can give in that sense. The verses go on to say there's no greater love than a man can show than he lay down his lives for his friends. And in a sense, by sharing your time, that is exactly what you're doing. You're laying down your life, your energy, your resources for friends. And CAP needs as many as possible to be laying down their lives in a specific way for friends in order they can continue the work that they do. Many of the people that CAP has contact with have got into a situation of debt. And I think one of the things I've had to really learn, not just up here, but down here, is that huge number of those people are in that situation because of no real fault of their own. It's the hand that God's given them. And you do even get fairly affluent, certainly plenty of middle-class people who've just come across hard times. Their company's gone bust, they've been made redundant, their partner's died, they've been invalided in some way, all sorts of different things. We tend, when we think of poverty, to focus on the people on the street or whatever. But it's the same for many of them. It's amazing if you chat to some of them, the stories they've got. So to give you an example of just one story, then we'll look at a guy called Sid.
It's actually quite frightening. I'm not a guy that frightens easily, but looking back on it, it is actually quite frightening that he got to that point. My name's Sid. I'm 58 years old. In my younger life, I was running to sport, cricket, rugby, boxing. Used to get paid for playing cricket and rugby. Actually playing cricket with Ian Botham, Graham Hick, Tom Moody, and Percy Carthy, and Solomon was still at that time. I seriously injured myself, which meant that my sporting career was not over, but it would never be professional as I wanted it to be. I actually had an accident at work. I had something fell on my head. They took me up and gave me an x-ray. And this lovely little chap came through. He said, "Oh, we found something that's not there, not supposed to be there." And I went, "No, you need a brain." And he said, "No, you've got a tumour." And I said, "No. I'm indestructible, mate. I don't get things like that. Can't come to me." Brain tumour was operated on April 2015. Pretty much a year later, was diagnosed with Crohn's, which is quite a nasty stomach disorder. Admitted to hospital, and just before I was admitted to hospital, my mother passed away, who I've been looking after for a few years, quite suddenly as well. It turned out I was suffering from a very severe depression because of what had been going on. And obviously during that time as well, I was getting into debt without actually knowing I was getting into debt. I was on some quite heavy duty medication and it just spiralled. So pretty much everybody you could owe money to, I owed money to. The nurse came into the room and she said, "Can I get you anything?" I said, "No, just shut the door and let me die. I don't have enough." The will to fight it had just gone. So they looked after me in hospital and fixed the broken bits again and got me up and running. And when I came out, someone referred me or said to me, "If you've got problems with these people, you can go to your car." And when I got home is when I made the phone call to CAP. I tried to collect everything that was relevant to what was going on, so letters and bills and all the correspondence, and everything was explained which puts you so much at ease because you actually, for the first time, know what's going on. And then Andrew says, "No, give you some," actually gave me a load of prepaid envelopes. If anything comes, send this off to Cat. And for the first time think, crikey, there's a way out of this, you know. It was like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. Brilliant. That's when Andrew dropped the bombshell. "You're about to come to church on Sunday," he said. So I said, "No, all right, no, that'd be nice. That'd be nice to come on." And I turned up knowing two people, Andrew and Chris. When I left, 20 plus people, "See you next week, see you, have a good week, see you next week." I'm going, crikey, it's a bit different, isn't it? It's all very nice. That was 4 years ago, but maybe a bit longer. And apart from the times when I've been in hospital, I've not missed a Sunday. I see things totally differently now. My whole attitude is different now. I wake up every day, and every day is now a lovely day. Without Cap, Gary, Andrew and Chris and the church, I actually would rather not think about where I would be now. It really has made that much of a difference to my life. It's that sense of belonging and the sense of friendship. To me, it is priceless.
Thanks, Todd. So that's just one story, fairly recent one. One before that we used to use, a guy called Simon. And Simon, particularly what I remember from that video, was that for 2 years nobody had passed the threshold of his door because the debt and the mail that he got and the callers he got was always all about money, and he just hid away. And the insecurity and the fear that creates is incredible. So how did they support him? Well, as you saw, Sid gathered together all his information, that's parcelled up, sent to head office, and somebody whose financial services associate recognised legally, they go through that and think, right, what do we do about the debts and position that this person is in? They contact the card holders, the people that they owe money to, electricity board, gas, whatever it might be, and say, now everything comes through us now. And so all the communication goes through to head office, and then they look at it and see what to do about it and so on. So that's the technical bit. Often the client doesn't meet them other than on the phone, but the local person is called a debt advisor, and they will be more local, and they will call in to Sid, and they will begin the conversation in the first place, as you saw here, and then they will continue that conversation and help as time goes on and so on. And the third person that gets involved is somebody called a befriender. Some often befrienders have been through the service before and themselves come out of debt. And they're just there to be a friend, to be a mate, to be a pal, to be a buddy to the person that's going through. So often there's three people involved in that. The average time to clear a debt is, for our clients, is about 2 years. Some it can be 3 or even 4 years. So you can see how the person has to make that commitment to say, okay, I want out of this, and yes, I will do what I'm asked. They have to then follow the guidance that they're given in terms of how they pay the bills, manage the money, and so on. So when they get debt-free, then the head office gives them a call and tells them, and then when they tell them, there's a signal at head office, and they hold the phone up, and everybody cheers, and there's whistles blown, and so on. So the recipient hears the celebration at head office, and they can begin to plan differently. To support that process, there are things like the money management course, which Sarah is hoping to run, has now been trained to do, and hopes to run in the new year. That can be for people that aren't in debt, that are just looking, how do I manage my finances better? And there's a life skills which talks about how do you make nutritious meals that don't cost a fortune. those sort of things. How do you broaden your social interaction with people? Because that can be such a help. There's job clubs, which is where we help people write their CV, find out what they're really good at, and suggest ways in which they might find employment. So all of these things work together. But the debt crisis is how we started. We've added these extras to support people before they get there, as well as during. And of course, that final thing of he was invited to church. And we didn't have two heads, not on one body anyway. And the impact of that, and you can see that there's a guy that has accepted the grafting into Jesus and now living a very, very different life. And so really my appeal this morning is, yes, I do come to represent CAP, but I recognise the needs out there, especially now in this coming 12, 24 months, are huge. So what I do ask of you is that you would think about what we've talked about this morning and pray and give in a way that God leads you. And that might be to a different charity, a different cause than CAP. That's God's work with you. That's not my responsibility. Mine is to present CAP to you. So I would appreciate, and helping you do that, there's a few books at the back, on the left-hand side of the table. And you can help yourself, and literally, they are meant to be taken away. I'm meant to give them to you. So there's no charge for that. And they're the story of how CAP has become what it is today. And so take that away. The only thing I ask is that either you read it, or you've got somebody in mind and you can give it to them and they read it. So as long as it's read, that's fine. But that'll tell you much more about the background of CAP. The other thing, there's two types of forms there. There's one, a very formal looking one. It's got lots of information on it. And it's the sort of form you would use if you wanted to give on a regular basis to CAP. And it sets up a monthly standing order and so on. That may be beyond all of you, or certainly most of you. But those are there, should you wish, and you can use those to particularly say that I'm happy to be contacted. And all you need to do for that is put your name in, which is about here, and then up here there's a choice of email, telephone, text or something like that, and you put your contact information, which will be a telephone number if it's going to be text, or an email address, and tick the box that says email, telephone or whatever. What will happen with that is that CAP, I will gather those as I leave, and CAP will be in touch. End of. When they're in touch, you can then say, okay, well, I'd like to receive the quarterly little magazine news sheet and keep up to date with what's going on. Or I'd like to know how I can pray. Or I would like to give, but as a one-off or regular. They will talk you through, and it is not a pressure sale, honest. But they'll just make contact with you, they'll have your name on the database, and they'll send out relevant information now and again. So you can very much choose. I've also left a piece of paper there, so rather than look at the form, you can just write your name, telephone number if you want to be contacted by telephone or text, email address if it's by text, and then your signature at the end. And again, that just supplies CAP with that information to keep our contact with you. As a young, new church, I talked a little bit to Sarah about this, opportunities are rife in this area. The nearest CAP church is over in Telford. Was it 20, 30 minutes, depending on traffic away? So if there was any momentum for doing that, creating a church that was a CAP church, meaning that you have a CAP debt centre, you have to have somebody willing to give, I think for the debt centre it's 3 days a week, it might be 2 days a week, I think. To manage that and the sort of systems and the events that I've told you. And a church has to give to CAP to do that because there's all the background information, the publicity, the actual financial advisors and so on to support. More information about that should you want it. But, thinking of these verses of love one another, no greater love has the man laid down his life for his friends. And then verse 17, this is my commandment, love each other. When you go into a vineyard and see a vineyard, they're gorgeous, aren't they? We saw a few pictures earlier, straight lines and so on. and lovely colour, and then you see the fruit growing on them. Sight to behold. People look and say, wow, that definitely is a vineyard. As a new church, how do people perceive you when they look in? As churches together in Shrewsbury, do we really shine that light outwards and let people know what we think, what we feel, and how we are? So the idea of becoming a CAP church is all part of that. It's the reaching out. Yes, we need to share the good news, but I think most people listen to what they see first of all, and then as they impress and see and appreciate what they do see in terms of lives, then they say, what makes you live that way? Or why do you do it that way? And then we get the opportunity to serve with our words. So, that's a little bit about CAP. That's a little bit about John 15. One of my favourite verses about giving is very similar to verse 12 in this passage. Your joy will overflow. So just actually at the end of verse 11. Your joy will overflow. There's a verse in Luke 6. You may know it. Give, and it will be given to you. Okay, so the response is we give, God gives to us. And remember, I'm talking about giving in every sense of our time, our energy, as well as our finances. God gives to you. The one precursor to that is that if we give this, it doesn't mean that God gives us exactly the same thing, but twice as much of it. He gives us in totally different ways that we expect and know. We give of our time, and he gives us a sense of purpose and joy in our hearts, etc. So, but it does say, give, and it will be given to you. And then it says, good measure. You know, in the markets, you can imagine in the Middle East, and Jesus talks about it, a lot of the time the measures were a bit dodgy, shall we say. But he says, no, I'll do it in good measure. Give and it will be given to you. Good measure. And then it says it's pressed down. You know, if you're giving wheat or you're putting your cereal into an airtight container or something, you give it a little shuffle, but you push it down, you press it down a bit. Give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, and then it says shaken together. So let's make sure we really fill it as much as we can. And then we'll put some more in, and then it's flowing over. And so you've got this image of God giving, full measure, shaken down, pressed down, and then still flowing over. And how does he give it to us? Gently. He says it will be dropped into your lap. So that's the way that God gives. Very much the fullness that John 15 talks about. So I just encourage you that as you remain in the vine, grafted in, as you feed on the Lord Jesus in your relationship, get into the Word. I think you mentioned that earlier, Tom. Pray. And praying, remember, isn't a list of prayer requests. It's not a shopping list. It's a relationship. It's a talking to God about how you feel, how you're thinking, good things, bad things, even sometimes about why you're grumpy. It's all of that. That's that relationship where the sap flows, the Spirit flows into our lives. So, become part of the vine. Remain in Jesus, that relationship. And give out, look out. For each other, number one, but then look out to those around you and become a light set on a hill, so to speak. So as I close, a book, a formal form, or there's just a list you can create in order to be in touch or give. So I then pass that to you. But even if it's not CAP, consider this very generous God and give him whatever way you can to him, whether it be time, energy, money, or whatever. So thank you for the time. Lovely to meet you all. And God bless you in all that you're trying to do here. Thank you, John.
I just want to say thank you very much for Bill for coming out, and for Sarah for telling us about CAP in the first place. And I just, when Sarah mentioned it, and what was interesting is I heard CAP mentioned that same month that Sarah first mentioned it to me about 3 or 4 times randomly. And I just started hearing CAP. And I had never heard of it before. And I'm like, what is this CAP thing? And then Christians Against Poverty. Oh, okay. What is that? What does it do? And so I looked it up. And it just reminded me of a similar, not quite the same ministry that is pretty well known in the U.S., And we hosted that at our church in Concord, California, and we would run courses there called Financial Freedom, which is relatively similar to the money course that Sarah is going to be doing, sort of a pilot run to start with. So if anyone's interested in doing that, talk to Sarah, and that'll be in the new year. But it's something that Ruth and I did together, that version in the U.S. And it was shortly after we got married, we were putting our finances together. We had already had a concept of what we wanted that to look like, but the American financial system was sort of newish to her because she hadn't dealt with it much while she was there before we got married. And so it was really helpful to learn together a lot of the fundamentals and things that I sort of knew and took for granted, for us to do that together and evaluate what that would look like for us together. And so similarly here, I'm going to sit on the CAP course at least because the British system is similar but not identical to the U.S. system. And I figured it'd be good to just learn what might be some of the differences that would be helpful. And when life circumstances change, you get a new job, you get a different house, new family member, whatever it may be, it's good to reevaluate your financial circumstances and to see how you might want to adjust things and do things differently and consider things that you may not have thought about. So I want to encourage everyone to pray about and consider taking the money course in the new year and thinking about who you know that might benefit from that as well. And also pray about who you know who might be facing debt problems that you could refer to CAP. And if God is calling you, as Bill said, to help support financially or with time and volunteering, financial debt is one of the major contributors to generational poverty in any country and anywhere in the world. And when people are stuck in a place of hopelessness because they see no way out, it's easy for people to get into drugs and alcohol abuse and have fits of anger and depression and just pass that on down, and the difficulties and the abuse that comes from feeling not as you would hope to feel gets passed on from one generation to the next. So this is an opportunity for us as a church to try to make a difference in Shrewsbury and in the lives of people who really could use help. Anyways, just want to encourage you to pray about that. We've gone a little bit over time. We started a bit late. Hopefully we can maybe start inching our way back to closer to starting on time in weeks ahead. But we will play one more song to worship. I'm going to pass the basket around. We don't do that often, but if you do feel like you want to give to CAP, all of the offering will go to CAP today. And then also if you have any names of young people that you wanted to consider for Alpha, go ahead and put them in there. There is some paper that's floating around somewhere, and